Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Welcome back. I want to start off this episode by, it's not necessarily an apology, but I want to acknowledge that I was looking at a few of my videos and I realized that I've misspoken a few times. For some reason, I keep assigning things to Paul. One of the part where the Bible mentions a man with long hair is a disgrace, that was Paul. I accidentally assigned the scriptures where I was talking about the books of Moses and that Paul came and finished the book of Moses, which is not the case. It was Joshua who did that. And again, just looking at some of my videos, I realized I've misspoken a couple of times. So I want to acknowledge that. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I do. The principles that I'm speaking on, standing on, I stand on. Jesus is Lucifer, and the Bible is an intended trick. Intended. This is why I'm making this an issue. I mean, I don't go up to people, and try to preach anything. But if we're going to talk about truth, what I find is that this is intended to deceive. I had an interaction a couple of weeks ago with, what do they call, Black Israelites? And it was funny. Now there's like 7 of them. They got a booth. There's a dude with a microphone and they're loud. They had some images up which caught my attention, right? I've seen these dudes before, but they had these images up that had Jesus as Lucifer, which is, the point that I'm making. But the thing is that they were asserting that this white Jesus is Lucifer. And anyway, we got into this sort of debate. And the one thing that this was interesting. There was like 7 of these dudes. The one question that I posed that nobody could get around was, have you read it from cover to cover? And if you haven't, you're being a liar because you're standing out here. This dude literally has a microphone as if he's studied the whole thing from the beginning to the end and knows everything in it. Now, it's interesting with the Black Israelites because I've seen them often. I've seen video clips of them and they talk very confidently, and it does seem that they've read some scriptures and they'll have some detail into which they, and how they describe their position, but they're still off. It was funny because I ended up walking away from these dudes when, what did he say? The main dude, the dude with the microphone said something about, he was talking about the greater luminary and the lesser luminaries, which is some phrase out of the Bible. And I mentioned to him that you do realize that the sun is not luminous. It's reflecting light from the sun. He, he thought that this was interesting because again, in one sense, they're standing there very confidently, very ardently pointing fingers and loud and shit. And I was like, dude, all you got to do is look, and you can see that the moon is always reflecting sunlight from the sun. It's reflecting light from the sun. If you look at the moon at any time, it's reflecting light from wherever the sun would be. It may be nighttime, but the light that's coming off of the moon is being reflected from the sun. Anyway, one, he didn't realize that or didn't know that, as he's still screaming. He never, acquiesced at all. But then he mentioned something about, I don't believe in Jupiter and all of those shit. It's like, I'm done. I'm not going to argue with somebody who, in my opinion, is ignorant to basic science. All you got to do is look. There's telescopes. You can look and see. And, I don't know. I guess you think it's magic or something. I don't know. But anyway, again, I do make mistakes, and I want to acknowledge that. So we're going to start with that. The Bible tricks us into being the liar that it says that we are. The Bible tricks us into being the liar that it says that we are. And I've mentioned this a couple of times now. From the gate, right? People are taking babies and getting them baptized as though the baby knows what's going on. I've seen images of little children. I'm thinking of one video in particular. It was a little kid. He looked like he was anywhere from 2 to 4 years old, really small. And he's in the church and he's got his hand over his heart and he's doing everything that he sees the adults doing and he's doing it passionately. You're teaching him to be a liar because he don't know what the fuck is going on. You're teaching him to be a liar, acting like you know when you don't know. The whole ideal of baptizing a child is really an immoral thing because they don't know what the hell's going on. And a part of what's going on, in my opinion, is parents don't want their children to grow up and find that this shit might not be the truth. So they send them into, or they push them into this conditioning that basically, I don't want to say it makes it impossible, but really makes it hard for a person growing up to challenge or to even be willing to look outside of what they've been told. There's an expression that I learned some years ago. I believe it comes from the Jewish tradition that says something along the lines of, if you give me your child between the time they're born and 4 years old, you'll never have to question their allegiance to God, or something along that line. And what that's talking about is, when you're a baby, when you're young, your mind is malleable. And whatever it gets, those first few years, those formative years, they call them, your mind gets shaped into a position that is very hard to break as you grow older. It's like a mold. When your mind is young, the way that you think is when you're that young 2 years old, 3, 4 years old, the things that go on for you in those days, in the time of your life, your mind is soft and it gets set. And I'm going through this now. I'm still trying to break old habits from things that happened when I was really young. That's immoral, really. And cowardly, also. It really is cowardly. Because again, you're afraid that your kid might find out that the shit that you're believing in ain't the truth. Teach them how to think, not what to think. If what you are believing in is solid, organically just fall in line. Organically. You don't have to force it. Right? But again, we fear a lot of things. I mean, the Bible tradition, Armageddon's any minute. And so we're afraid, I don't want you to burn for 1,000,000 years, even though, again, you only lived for 20 or 30 or 40 years. So there's that part of it too. But anyway, being a good person is not as complicated as the Bible makes it. One of the issues that I've had, one of the things that has brought me to this place of understanding is looking at goodness. The Bible, the Torah, and even the Quran to some degree, they are constructed in a way that makes people who have a certain mental acumen seem to be smarter than you, which then they can kind of use that to make it seem that they're better than you. I've seen so many preachers who walk around so arrogantly. Who's this guy that was just in this debate? Billy Carson and Wes something or other. Billy's got issues as well, but Wes, he's a quite arrogant dude. Just watching him talk, he's well educated, obviously, academically educated. He's a historian. He's a theologian. I know he's a historian. I'm not sure about the theologian part, but I'm pretty sure he is. But he speaks with such a arrogance, really. During the debate with Billy Carson, I remember there was a point where he said, do you know what the word something means? Some fancy word. What the fuck does that matter? And again, my point right here is that what about the people who can't read? What if a person cannot read? God doesn't give a shit about them. If they can't read, they can't learn about Jesus other than you being, telling it to them. And, the situation may be where I can't come to your church. I'm not coming out of the jungle. This is where I live. You know what I mean? And as we know, there are missionaries that'll go out and try to bring you into their fold. But a person who cannot read is not unworthy. It's not, it's like it's implying the tradition of you need to read the Bible in order to have a relationship with God, the God of the Bible. It's like you're saying that if you're stupid, just follow me, and I'll lead you there. Fuck that. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous to me. And that pisses me off about not just Christianity, really. Like a lot of religions do that. I've spent a lot of time with a Buddhist community, and some years ago, one of my teachers gave me a book called The Path of the Bodhisattva, I think it was called. And I opened it up and started to read the foreword. And in the foreword, there were 3 words that I had to go and get a dictionary to understand. At the time, I didn't know what pedagogical meant. Pedagogical is relating to teaching. Pedagogical was one of the words. Anthropomorphic, I've used that word. I now understand what it means. And if you're an academic, if you go to college, you probably know what anthropomorphic is, or anthropology, just the whole anthro thing. It's a human-like or relative to being human. Those words may be common in those circles, but most of us aren't college educated. Most of the United States is not college educated. And in my experience and opinion, I'm not certain about this, but from what I see, I don't think most of us are college educated. If you walk up to a random person on the street and say, what does anthropomorphic mean? They may look at you kind of crazy. Oh, I don't fucking know. And then lachrymose was the other word. Lachrymose, Lachrymose, which means teary-eyed. The point that I'm bringing all that up for was that I'm reading this book, and I can read, I'm somewhat, I wouldn't say well-read, but I can read, and I do read. I had to put the book down, after, again, the 3rd word that I have to go and get a dictionary for. I set that book down for months before I picked it back up. And the funny thing was that once I picked it back up and forced my way through the foreword and got to the actual text, the text wasn't that complicated. But this foreword written by this, what do they call them? Eggheads? People who think they're so smart. That's a bullshit approach to spirituality. That's a bullshit approach. The ideal that you have to be so smart, you got to read Latin and you got to read Greek if you're going to actually get it, and I know that, I believe at least, that what I would resonate with as far as the ideal of God goes, it's not that complicated. You don't need all that shit. You don't need to know how to read to be spiritual, to have a relationship with the divine. And I kind of hate saying it because the Abrahamic traditions have sullied that ideal so much. I think that it automatically triggers thoughts of this pyramid, top of the pyramid deity and all that shit. I'm not fucking with none of that. I was just driving a few minutes ago and I was realizing that, I'm not an atheist in the traditional sense. People think, this must be an atheist. I don't believe in Abraham's God. I don't believe in a God that wears a hat, a God that has favorites, a God that you can reduce into a being, a human. It has a gender, it has favorites, none of that. If there were something close to a God for me, it would probably be a wave function, if you know what that is, if you know anything about quantum physics, which is the other approach to understanding reality, the approach where you actually use your actual experience as opposed to a story. What you can see. We can see these things. The wave function. That's as close to a God that I'm getting, I guess, right now. If you're being a moral person, you have to read the book. This is the funny thing about it. If you're moral, if you have a relationship with morality, you have to read it because they're telling you got to kill your kid. Well, you got to kill your kid. You got to stand by where other people are being killed. Well, if I'm being moral, I can't do that without ensuring that everything that you're telling me is the truth. So now I've got to learn how to read and read this whole book before I can stand by and allow these soldiers to go in here and beat these old women and little children to death with no pity and no mercy, as the Bible says, right? God commanded that. So I can't stand by that. And so now you got to wait for 2 to 3 or 4 years for me to learn how to read. And that's probably a minimal degree of being able to read. Then you start reading this weird text and it's again weird and goes in circles and talks all kind of weird shit. It's not that complicated. Being a good person is not that complicated. Being worthy of help, of patience, of love, it is not that complicated. Which is another evidence for me, another clue that this shit can't be right. This cannot be right. Life is not this complicated. Again, the Bible is full of all kinds of upside down shit. I was talking a few videos ago about the scene where one of God's priests throws down a stick and it turns into a snake and eats 2 other snakes. If you ever seen a snake eat a snake, which does happen, how the fuck you gonna eat 2 snakes? Your whole body is filled with one. And this is in one scene. This is one scene that all this shit is occurring. Come on, man. No way. Child baptism, they're taking children and baptizing the child. Look, I get where an adult might feel that the child's spiritual life is up to me. That makes sense to some degree. But when you're baptizing a person, you are making a declaration for this person that you don't know they're going to be able to or willing to uphold or abide by. You don't know what your kid's going to think. I mean, how many children do we know? The jail is filled with Christians. The jails are filled with Christians. A lot of them were baptized as babies. End up doing horrible things. Terrible things. That's immoral. I mean, I really, I stand by that. Baptizing children or indoctrinating children before they've had a chance to reason and think, before they even can say the word baptism. There's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that. Anyway, there's a story in the Bible, in the book of Ezekiel. The Bible is so weird, man. In the book of Ezekiel, there's a story where God tells Ezekiel to make some bread, gives him a recipe, millet, lentils. I think there may have been wheat and some other things in this bread. Ezekiel is to bake this bread over human feces. Ezekiel hadn't done anything wrong. He was a righteous follower at the point of this command. What the fuck are you? That's the fucking Lucifer telling you to bake bread over human feces, and proof that the God of the Bible is not what it is asserted as is right in that story, in that Ezekiel, when Ezekiel hears this at first, he's like, well, I'm sure he's like, what the fuck? He tells God that I've never put anything impure in my mouth. And so God changes his mind. Oh, well, okay, use animal feces instead. Thought you know everything, dude. Why is Ezekiel having to remind you? 1. 2, and actually that's not 1. That's 2. 1 is, why the hell are you telling him to bake bread over human feces? That is a clue to what I am talking about. The God of the Bible is the devil of the Bible. telling you to eat feces, to eat bread that's baked over feces, human feces. That's insane. That's immoral. That's unclean. The Bible God is the Bible's devil. Bible's devil. That's disgusting. The Exodus, I was reading about this recently. The Israelites exited Egypt and they're going to the land of Canaan. They spend 40 years walking in circles because God was pissed off and tricking them. You just telling them to keep walking in circles, I guess, for 40 years. It's an 11-day walk. It's an 11-day walk from Egypt to Canaan. How you can walk for 40 years, in a walk that takes 11 days, I don't know. But anyway, 600,000 men. 600,000 men. The estimates are that there had to be, once you include the women and children, somewhere around 1.5 million people. 1.5 million people walking around in circles in the desert for 40 years. Not one drop of evidence of that. No human bones, no fecal matter, no pots and pans and shit that they were using to cook. No evidence of that at all. And there would have to be evidence of that. For 600,000, even if it was just the men, 600,000 is an enormous number. That's an enormous amount of people walking around in the desert and not one skeleton. For 40 years, the Bible's a trick. It's a lie. It's a ruse. It's built on stories that existed long before the Bible. Abraham's God is not the first God on the planet. Judaism is not the first religion on the planet. I just heard I was watching some video and there was some dude who mentioned Judaism as the oldest religion on the planet. You don't know what you're talking about. It's not. In fact, it's not by a long shot. There were several religions that existed before Judaism, before the first religion based on Abraham, Judaism. There were many religions before that. This shit is crazy. There was a time, I don't do it so much anymore, but there was a time I used to watch some of these televangelists, and I'll never forget this one guy. He's kind of a bulky black dude. And I can't remember his name. I'm sure I can find him. But he was preaching. He had a light blue suit on. I still remember this suit. He was preaching, and in a big auditorium, they love their money. Big auditorium, and he was talking about, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He said something along the lines of being poor is a sin. He's telling people that if you're poor, then you're sinning somehow for being poor. And as he's encouraging people to come and bring money. There are people running up to the stage with bundles of money in their hand, bundles of cash, and they're making it rain. They're making it rain in church. And again, calling it church is weird. This is a big auditorium. I can't remember the dude's name, but that struck me as, I didn't think of it as evidence at the time because I wasn't on the page that I'm on now. But in reflection, I knew something was wrong. I was watching. I couldn't believe what the fuck. Are you fucking kidding me with this? These people believe this person came from God. This person who's having them run up to the stage and throw cash. There's a scripture that says, right? What does it say? The love of money is the root of all evil. A lot of times people mistranslate that as, or misquote that as, the love of money is evil, or something like that. But it's the love of money. The love of money is the root of all evil is in the Bible. This dude is preaching that there's something wrong with you if you're poor. What's this one preacher's name? Dollar. Creflo Dollar. The dude's name is Dollar. I don't know how this works, but it seems like there's some almost, I don't want to call it spiritual, but these clues are so evident. It's right in your face. Creflo Dollar, just on the basis of your name, I'm not following you. Not if you're going to ask for money. They love their money. Olstein, right? TD Jakes. Spirituality is free. It's free. I get that like materials cost money to like make Bibles. I get that having a building takes money, but you see how these people are living. It's funny with Creflo Dollar because I remember some years ago looking him up, and you know, people are smart. A lot of these people, these leaders of these churches are smart. They know better than to just stack up hundreds of millions of dollars. That's not going to look good. So they'll let themselves get into the lower millions. I've got a few million. Yeah, I got a few million. But they're using the church's money for everything, right? They're not spending their money. In fact, wasn't Creflo Dollar telling his church that he needed a private jet or something at some point? There's a part of me that feels like I need to apologize to people. I'm not meaning to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm not lying. From what I have found, the Bible is a trick. I believe wholeheartedly at this point that the devil of the Bible is the God of the Bible. It's a trick. The last video, I think I spoke about the Antichrist. I did. Christ is the Antichrist. Within the context of this story. And I want to get clear about that because I like I said, I don't believe in any God that has a favorite. I don't believe in any kind of a God that human qualities are assigned to. What I believe in is far beyond that. Far beyond that. There are no favorites. It's not a male or a female. It doesn't have a favorite people. It's bigger than all of that. Jesus is Lucifer. The Bible is a trick.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.